In September 1876, Sam Crockett of Duckery in Castle Douglas sat and won the Galloway bursary. Less than a month later, he arrived in Edinburgh to commence study at the university. Years later, he remembered his arrival on October the 26th of that year as follows. Out of the window, in defiance of regulations, a boy of 16 was hanging to the risk of his neck and to the annoyance of sundry other fellow passengers less enthusiastic than he. That eager, impressionable nuisance of a boy, with poetry-filled head protruding Edinburgh-wards, was the present writer. He had, in fact, just turned 17, and he was met off the train by his cousin, William Crockett, who recorded the event in his own diary for that year. William's father was a city missionary, and Crockett later fictionalised various experiences shared with him in the novels Clegg Kelly, Kid McGee, and a number of short stories. Crockett soon settled into modest lodgings at 50 St Leonard's Street, a place that would significantly influence his writing. He stayed there on and off for the next decade. The tenement, or land as it was known then, is no longer there, and is along the road from what Crockett describes as the Soothback, home of his urban character Clegg Kelly. Shall we just say it wasn't the most salubrious of accommodations? The 1881 census, taken on April the 3rd, shows a total of 77 people living in the tenement, with only one absent on the night of the census. There were some 17 different households, or families living in the tenement, between 4 to 7 to a household, and there were 6 lodgers listed. Demographics drawn from the census reveal that a third of the inhabitants were under the age of 20, but only 5 were in the 60 to 80 age range. These were 2 males in their 60s, 1 male in his 70s, and 2 females, widows, in their 70s. One of these was Crockett's landlady, Christina Clow, aged 72, who lived with what we can assume was her granddaughter, Jessie, aged 27. In 1881, Samuel Crockett, art student, Edinburgh University, and William MacGeorge, art student, Royal Institute, are also listed as lodging there. MacGeorge was a boyhood friend of Crockett's. Like all successful writers, Crockett steals from fact for his fiction, and we see something of their student days in a number of stories, most notably with MacGeorge playing a central role in the humorous story Max Enteric Fever in the collection Bog, Myrtle and Peat from 1895. MacGeorge also features in The Raiders, Rogue's Island, and is the eponymous hero in the Kirkcudbright-based novel Little Lesson. The census states that the St Leonard's property Crockett stayed in had 3 rooms with windows. This accords with Crockett's written account that he had 2 windows. We can assume his bedroom window faced to the crags, and that he and MacGeorge had access to the parlour room facing into the city. The other window was presumably in the bedroom shared by his landlady Christina and her granddaughter Jessie. Among the rest of the households in the land, it seems that both men and women worked in professions varying from fishmonger to joiner, upholsterer and dressmaker. There was 1 other student lodging in the building and 3 other lodgers, one of whom was absent. Of the 2 working lodgers, one was a male printer, compositor, and the other a female bookbinder. They didn't live in the same households. The census thus offers us a picture of solid working class people, but it requires the likes of Crockett to bring them to life for us. One of the men living at the property at this time has the surname Pryde, Pryde, so we may speculate Crockett adopted this name for his own alter ego in his novel Sandy's Love. It's another small example of how Crockett raids the truth for his fiction. Crockett fictionalises his landlady and her granddaughter, a draper's assistant, in several instances. For example, in Kit Kennedy, Mrs Clow becomes Mistress Christieson, their new landlady, was a widow whom penury had made careful and many lodgers suspicious. But from the first she took to our pair of Galloway lads. It was Kit who did the talking, and the terms as finally arranged were easy, 3 shillings a week each, with coal and gas. No extras. It's tempting to cast Jessie as the aspiring love interest Mary Bissett in Kit Kennedy, but this is speculation. We can offer some more certainty about Crockett's description of places than people. After all, there's less requirement to alter the basic details, although of course he may add colour and flavour to enhance his story. In the 1909 reminiscence My Two Edinburghs he writes, "We lived next the sky in a many-storied grey house, but one of our 2 windows, by God's grace, looked up to the mural battlements of the Salisbury Crags and across the valley to the western shoulder of Arthur's Seat. That seemed in some far-off way to suggest home. But from the other window, looking down on the twinkling lamps receding into the distances by the city dusk, frankly, to go near them, they made me giddy. And what is stranger still, after years of mountain climbing and uneasy muleback, the giddy feeling of that first night comes back to me in dreams, always connected with my old lodgings and my first glimpse of the long lines of yellow Edinburgh lights. Crockett had loved climbing from boyhood. He grew up climbing the roofs of Castle Douglas and the ramparts of Thrieve Castle. He would later climb in the Alps. A view of Salisbury Crags must have been a constant temptation to him. The area around St Leonard Street, Montague Street and Rankeillor Street are well described in Crockett's fiction, and the area features as a setting for the story Billiam and for the novels Sandy's Love and The Dew of Their Youth, as well as Kit Kennedy, the novel which most closely accords to Crockett's own youthful experience and is often read as semi-autobiographical. In all honesty, you can find Crockett in all of his novels, but we do well to remember that he was a fiction writer and that the blurring between fact and fiction came easily to him. But that doesn't make the domestic detail any less interesting in terms of social history. For example, in Vida, 1907, there's another description of St Leonard Street, where he writes, "In the narrow old street of St Leonard's, where for years I dwelt, and of which in dreams I'm still a habitant, we slept like tops, my comrade and I, till within 10 minutes of class, with all the coal traffic of South Edinburgh thundering under our window, carters shouting, wheels gritting, and clattering engines snorting." And in The Dew of Their Youth, set earlier, he writes, "I can see the room yet, and the narrow passage which led to it. Here, close to the door, was a clock with a striking apparatus of surprising shrillness to warn us of the flight of the half-hours. Ting! Another gone. Then, as the hour drew near, this academic clock cleared its decks for real action. Almost it might be said that it cleared its throat, such a roosty, gasping crow did it emit. This was technically called the warning." And when such a description is offered on several occasions, we may reasonably assume Crockett is writing from memory. And it's worth bearing in mind his close observation for places was one of his greatest strengths. Of course, the Edinburgh Crockett writes of has changed almost beyond recognition. For example, walking along the Radicals Road to Dalkeith, or even along St Leonard Street in the 21st century, is an entirely different experience. And for me, this is part of the joy of Crockett's fiction. It can take you to a place in the past, insignificant to big history, but more real and grounded. To be able to see Edinburgh as it was in the late 19th century is a privilege and pleasure, whatever you make of the plots of novels like Kit Kennedy and Clegg Kelly. From the outset in 1876, the £20 a year Galloway bursary awarded to Crockett wasn't enough to support him, so he first tried tutoring and then turned to journalistic writing to supplement his income. Essentially, he faced the challenges typical of a student far from home: financial struggles, isolation, and the cultural shock of transitioning from rural Galloway to urban Edinburgh. It's not surprising, then, there's a poignancy to many of the fictionalised observations he makes in his novels and short stories. And although Crockett lived in Edinburgh for over a decade, his itchy feet, and the need to make ends meet financially, meant he spent extended periods abroad, notably in 1879 and 1884, as a travelling tutor. But Edinburgh remained significant. It was in Edinburgh that he first earned money from journalistic writing. It was during his time in Edinburgh that he was transformed from Sam Crockett, Galloway herd, to Samuel Rutherford Crockett, writer. He studied at Edinburgh University 1876–79, but left without formally graduating, and then returned to New College between 1881 and 1886. New College had been established in 1843 as a college of the Free Church of Scotland. While the focus of training was for the ministry, the Galloway Raiders Archive now also holds one of Crockett's student notebooks from the academic year 1881, which was his first at New College. The notebook is peppered through with cartoon drawings and suggests he was not always the most diligent of students. It reveals, surprisingly, that he was studying geology amongst other science subjects. Indeed, he wrote himself that he had toyed with the idea of a science degree, but gave it up in favour of travelling. There's still a lot of research to be done to delve into this time in Crockett's life. At the moment, it's a mystery to be saved for another time. But the writing which derives from Crockett's time in Edinburgh is key to developing the blend of natural and urban landscapes which became a recurring theme in many of his Scottish-based stories, symbolising the intersection of his rural roots in Galloway and his urban student days in Edinburgh. He also used his experiences to highlight the cultural differences between Edinburgh and Galloway, as for example in Kit Kennedy, where he portrays the clash through Kit's interaction with city girl Mary Bissett. The novels Kid McGee and Clegg Kelly also reveal many of the tensions Crockett observed between the rural and urban poverty which were reality in late 19th century Scotland. It's indisputable that Crockett frequently adapted his real-life experiences into fiction, creating characters and scenes that echoed his own life. Even when setting his stories in earlier periods, such as in The Dew of Their Youth, Crockett incorporated the emotional authenticity of his experiences, making his fiction both relatable and timeless. For example, he captures the loneliness and financial struggles of student life through the character of Duncan McAlpine. There's also much good Scots humour to be found. The short stories Maxenteric Fever and Billiam offer both deep and very funny insights into Crockett's lived experience, as do the stories and subsequent novel featuring the gamin urchin Clegg Kelly. The experiences Crockett had in Edinburgh left a lasting imprint on his work. The city's influence is evident in the characters he created, the landscapes he described, and the themes he explored. It's fair, then, to conclude that Crockett's journey from the rural heart of Galloway to the vibrant soul of Edinburgh was a transformative one. The city shaped him in profound ways, influencing not only his personal growth, but also his literary legacy. We're lucky to still be able to experience some of this today through reading his works.